Peace research is an academic discipline that is committed to the objective of reduction of conflict violence. This objective, according to probably the most famous peace research, Johan Galtung, defines peace research. But can peace research do that? Does it really offer tools for the prevention of violent conflicts? Has the knowledge it produces constituted less violent realities and realities in which it is more difficult to justify violence? This is the puzzle that this video deals with. It is based on Professor Timo Kivimäki's book, Can Peace Research Make Peace? The question about the contribution of peace research will be answered by using the experiences of an ongoing conflict transformation process that started after two destructive, cannibalistic conflicts in the jungle of West Kalimantan on the Indonesian island of Borneo. West Kalimantan has traditionally been one of the poorest provinces in Indonesia. It has suffered from occasional inter-ethnic conflicts for a long time. Since 1950, there have been 13 conflicts between Dayak and Madurese ethnic communities, one between Dayak and Chinese, one between Chinese and Malay, and two between Malay and Madurese communities. At the turn of the millennium, the province became infamous for two massive cannibalistic riots, both claiming more than 1,000 lives. Much of the inter-ethnic violence of the past 7 decades has occurred in disputes between communities that consider themselves as local, Malay and Dayak, to the province, and a community that originates from the overcrowded Indonesian island of Madura. At the core of the violence in West Kalimantan lies two interpretations, two kinds of knowledge, one emphasizing the reality of localness, local traditions, local norms, and local identity, while the other emphasizes the equality of all Indonesians. Since part of the conflict is constituted in interpretations and knowledge of nationality versus locality, it is easy to imagine that peace, too, could be built on more peaceful interpretations and knowledge. Peace research could offer not just tools that can be used for conflict resolution, but also knowledge and interpretation that themselves could constitute more peaceful realities. This is exactly what happened in West Kalimantan. New practices that were introduced in university classes, as well as new knowledge adopted by conflicting parties, created realities in which large-scale violence no longer had a role to play. There have been smaller incidents with several people killed every year during the first decade of the new millennium, and some of the conflict's disputes have remained unsolved. Since 2010, however, there has been a clear decline in violence, and many former conflict areas of the province have become so calm that they have started attracting a lot of domestic and foreign investments. As a result, the province has started to develop economically. To understand how peace research scholarship managed to help in this process, we will have to look at the conflict problem in West Kalimantan more closely. By studying conflict episodes in West Kalimantan since 1950 and by using lessons from other conflicts, it is possible to understand the path to conflict and violence in this Indonesian province. At the core of the antagonistic relationship between ethnic groups was a state that did not perform its functions. Before 1998, Indonesia was an autocracy, unresponsive to the special needs of its peripheries, discriminatory towards its outer islands and ethnicities from outside the central island of Java. Resources allocated for law enforcement in West Kalimantan were insufficient, and the state apparatus was corrupt. As a result, people had to resort to their own ethnic communities for welfare and security, as there was no state that could have been on their side. This way, the conditions in West Kalimantan reminded those that David Fearon describes in his rationalist explanation of conflicts. Election campaigns mobilized people not on ideological but on ethnic platform. 5 of the 17 biggest ethnic conflicts in the area were triggered by motives of communalized political competition. economic competitions were communalized too. 9 out of 17 main conflicts between ethnic groups were triggered by individual economic disputes over grazing rights, debts, land disputes. One of the 2 most devastating conflicts was triggered by an unpaid bus fare. In almost all ethnic conflicts, the incident that triggered violence was an individual crime that was framed as communal because the perpetrator sought protection from his community and because the victims mobilized revenge not just against the perpetrator, but also against the perpetrator's family and community. Indonesian political culture discouraged open debate on issues that divided people. As a result, much of the argumentation about local or national norms and local or national rights was done by means of demonstrative action. Demonstrative violence spoke and presented arguments. Some individuals in the Madurese community insisted on their equal national rights in a harsh manner and gained a reputation of violence. Surprisingly, often the demonstration of equality was related to local women. In some cases, disputes arose when Madurese men acted imposingly and violently as they felt they were being rejected because of their ethnicity. In some other cases, Malay or Dayak men simply refused to accept that non-local men could date local girls, even if the relationship was consensual. The refusal to accept inter-ethnic romantic relationships by the local men was a demonstrative argument highlighting the lower status of the non-local people from other islands. In some other cases, argumentation by Madurese demonstrative action targeted local norms and emphasized the rules common to all Indonesian. Disrespectful behavior towards traditional Dayak and Malay leaders was often a way to argue against local hierarchy. Disrespect in action and refusal, for example, to pay compensation demanded by the local adat law argued against the relevance of local norms. In some areas, the practice of Madurese disregard of local norms not only argued against local norms, but it also created a reality of effective disappearance of the customary adat law. Communities were doing as Donald Horowitz had theorized in his book, The Deadly Ethnic Riot. They were saying things with murder instead of debating about them with words. Finally, communities that considered themselves from another in 1999. This way, action did not just talk in favor of local rights, it also created a reality that distinguished locals from other Indonesians. In addition to the emergence of communal antagonism and collective and personal motives for violence, the conflict in West Kalimantan could be understood as a failure of obstacles of violence. On the one hand, this failure was partly caused by the lack of resources of the police. The ratio of police to people was at the end of the 1990s lower in West Kalimantan than almost anywhere in the world. Thus, the ability of the state to enforce a non-violent order was weak simply due to the lack of material resources. However, in addition to material obstacles of violence, also the normative obstacles were missing in West Kalimantan. Dayak and Malay narratives of the conflict reveal how simplistic causal interpretations of the conflict weakened the moral accountability of the local communities. According to a village head, Tanjung Karakat, Sambas Malays were like a spring which could be pushed down by the violence and crime of the Madurese, but which then had to bounce back. Thus, their violence was simply a reaction caused by the violence by the Madurese, not a choice of Malay individuals that could be condemned as immoral. Furthermore, some Malay fighters saw their own action as something that the nature of Malay people explained. Malays are gentle people, but if provoked seriously enough, they are known to run amok. Thus, it was their nature, not a conscious choice, that could be morally criticized. Individual moral responsibility was circumvented also by rituals that articulated interpretations according to which the war was led by the community rather than individuals, and that actions of individual combatants were directed by the ancestors of the community rather than fighters themselves. Spells, rituals, and trance allowed ancestors to take control of individual fighters. Thus, the moral blame for the atrocities was not theirs. It was collectively shared between living and dead members of the community. Also, the context of conflicts was seen as exceptional, and thus violence conducted in conflicts was not seen as morally as reprehensible as violence in other contexts. Yet, communal rioting did not differ from criminal misbehavior, and its motives were often very selfish. Yet, in ethnic tension, murder was no longer a murder. Fear was neither an obstacle for fighting, as amulets, protective water, and other types of traditional magic were mobilized for the purposes of mobilization. Some of the fighters of the local communities drank and took a bath in the charmed protective water, air tolak, to get protection, while others drank from the red bowl to get protection from bullets. Demonization of the enemy and language that subhumanized individuals of the enemy community further helped violence and removed immaterial obstacles to atrocities. Since much of the violence in West Kalimantan had been demonstrative argumentation for positions related to rights of communities, it was important for the reduction of such violence to try to transform demonstrative violence into verbal debate. To do that, John Burton and Herbert Kellman suggest using the educational platform of dialogue, or academic diplomacy as Wallenstein calls it. Studying together is a safe starting point. It does not send signals of weakness. It is not seen as a compromise to or recognition of one's enemy as a negotiating party. In West Kalimantan, a local scholar, Professor Syarif Ibrahim Al-Qadri, had soon after the massive conflict in 1999 started to cultivate interaction between different ethnicities in his university classes. In 2001, the Professor Timo Kivimäki joined the effort, and the classes started to systematically invite respected community leaders to join. After some years, the very leaders of each of the ethnic communities that had been involved in the conflicts were involved in the conflict resolution capacity building classes. Being involved in university education in a postgraduate teaching program was a source of modern power resources and prestige to the leaders that were normally seen as traditional. Yet, ethnic leaders in West Kalimantan were also genuinely committed to helping peace in the province, and not just after modern prestige. Without the political will of the leaders of the conflicting parties, and later the Indonesian government, no amount of peace research wisdom could have held. This way, it is possible already now to partially answer the question the title of this video poses. Peace research alone cannot make peace. There is a need for political will peace among the conflicting parties. In the beginning, the classes were held in different parts of West Kalimantan. In the process, consensus had started emerging, and as a result, a university class had started to look like a dialogue forum. Once the joint lectures to all ethnic leaders were introduced, it was time to make a transfer the university class into something more formal. Otherwise, the consensus that was emerging would not have had any formal status. At this stage, Professor Kivimäki informed the Vice President of Indonesia about the developments and requested official recognition for the meetings of the ethnic leaders. Vice President Yusuf Kalla, the hero of Asa peace talks and many other peace initiatives in Indonesia and elsewhere, sent his political deputy, Professor Johim Mansir Johan, to observe the first and third formal meeting of the university class that then decided to transform itself into West Kalimantan Ethnic Communication Forum. Later, Vice President sent his rapporteurs to each of the biannual meetings of the Forum. Vice Presidential rapporteurs took notes of the decisions made by the Forum, and these decisions are still archived at the office of the Vice President. The emergence of the West Kalimantan Ethnic Communication Forum was a game-changing development. Suddenly, communities were explicitly negotiating about the relations between communities, and they were all represented by their respected leaders. Words had replaced demonstrative action. Young men could no longer demonstrate their loyalty to their communities by revenging the wrongs they received from other communities. Instead, demonstrative action risked being viewed as disrespectfulness towards one's own ethnic leaders. If the leader of the Madurese community, for example, was already negotiating, violence against a Malay did not signal loyalty but distrust towards the ability of the Madurese leader to deal with the grievances of the community. Transformation of demonstrative argumentation into a verbal one was clearly a victory in which peace research was a part of. At the core of West Kalimantan's conflict was, however, the reality of the weak state. Since the massive wars of the 1990s, Indonesian state had developed into a positive direction. Ethnic leaders of West Kalimantan were actively supporting the development of modern governance, despite the fact that their own power base was in the traditional structures of governance. As collaborators of the Vice President in the West Kalimantan peace effort and as people involved in postgraduate university teaching, they were offered an alternative identity to the traditional one, an identity that had more prospects for the future. Learning from the analysis of the conflict episodes, ethnic leaders decided already in their first official meeting as a communication forum in 2008 to deal with the problem of individual crimes spreading into communal rioting. In this, they had the support of the local newspaper Pontianak Pos and the provincial police. They designed a code of conduct that they started following in situations of inter-ethnic crimes. According to the code, after such an incident, the leader of the perpetrators and victims community get together for a press release. The perpetrator's community leader condemns the crime and forbids his community to hide the perpetrator from the police. The two communities declare their support to the police. The victim's community leader declares that this crime was an incident involving individuals, not communities, and forbids his community from taking revenge against the perpetrator, and especially against any other members of the perpetrator's community. This code of conduct has been implemented several times, and each time major communal rioting could be avoided. Again, the virtue of this decision was related to the denial of opportunities violence might have offered. If the community leader is against revenge, young men could not use violence to become heroes. Thus, the practice that the Code of Conduct created reframed the social reality in a way that denied opportunities for gaining with violence. At the same time, the Code of Conflict significantly strengthened the state and its law enforcement. It went to the core of state fragility by discouraging challenges to the state's monopoly of legitimate violence. Another victory to an action based on peace research. The following year, just before the general elections, the Communication Forum decided that it was time to separate ethnicity from politics. Ethnic leaders issued a statement which the Pontianak Pos published the following day. Leaders of communities unanimously banned communal mobilization of political campaigns. Again, this move by the Communication Forum did not change the physical opportunities candidates had for ethnic mobilization. However, the framing changed, and so did the social reality. If candidates decided to try to attract votes by appealing to the ethnic loyalty of the voters, they risked being seen as selfish and in violation of the decision of their community leader. Appealing to communal solidarity could become a selfish signal of communal disrespect. West Kalimantan experienced in 2009 probably the first relatively non-violent elections in the history of the province. The diagnosis and prescription based on the analysis of conflict episodes and the use of Fearon's ideas on ethnic conflict were clearly a part of that success. Finally, in 2010, the West Kalimantan Ethnic Communication Forum decided to take the final step from the ethnic framing of violence to its individualization. According to the decision of the forum, inter-ethnic violence should always be seen as an individual crime. The context of inter-ethnic tension should not change that. "Murder is a murder" was the motto of the meeting of the forum in June 2010, and again the opinion of community leaders was published widely, now by several provincial newspapers, and the decision was again archived at the office of the Vice President of Indonesia. Nothing guarantees that if there is another conflict, that people did not go back to the framing in which conflict was a moral-free environment for violence. At the same time, initiating violence is probably more costly for individuals, and thus the emergence of the conflict framing could have become less likely due to this decision that was advised by peace research. Knowledge is a crucial part of social reality, and thus reframing of conflict realities as an intellectual action can fundamentally influence opportunities for the justification of and mobilization for violence. Thus, peace research is not only useful as a tool of peacemaking, insights from peace research may in themselves constitute more peaceful realities. Yet, knowledge, interpretations, and framings interact with agency, and not only with the agency of scholars. Political will of the key players in conflicts is still crucial for peace. Without it, knowledge from peace research means little. Thus, a crucial player of the West Kalimantan conflict, then political deputy of the Vice President, Professor Kivimäki Johan, concludes at the back cover of the book, "Can Peace Research Make Peace?" that this video is based on, by saying that peace researchers can be a part of a team for peace. Officials and peace researchers can work together for peace. Peace research really does have an important role to play in the settlement of conflicts. The experience in West Kalimantan could be a model for other ethnic conflict. Modern and traditional leaders advised by peace research can make peace.